Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I'm going to tell you about a neighbor who thinks he's going to own my property. I remember entering my grandfather's mountain cabin for the first time. I was a wide-eyed kid decades ago, amazed by the endless pines, crisp morning air, and how the sunlight cut through the trees. My grandfather always told me this place was more than a getaway. It was part of our family heritage. It's hidden on a hillside with a stunning view of a valley and a river meandering through meadows. Heavy logs, a wide front porch, and a pitched roof make the cabin sturdy for harsh winters. He displayed travel souvenirs, family and friend photos, and a lifetime of books on the walls. My grandpa and I spent weeks fishing and hiking here during school breaks. I fell asleep in the loft under blankets to the sound of wind rustling the treetops. He always said I'd own this land, never let it go, he said softly and determinedly. As a 10-year-old, I was too busy having adventures to think about it. I understood what he meant when I inherited the house years later. This cabin goes beyond real estate, a legacy. I bought that cabin after my grandfather died. Initially, I wasn't sure I wanted it. In my late 20s, I was caught up in the city's rush, working long hours at a demanding job and living in a cramped apartment with rotating housemates. Each year, my memories of the cabin grew stronger, reminding me that there was more to life than the daily grind. I realized that this cabin, nestled in towering pines and far from the hustle, was exactly what I needed to escape the never-ending obligations. I always intended to fix it when I had the time and resources. I would walk through the city, dreaming of waking up to birds instead of horns. I had to decide eventually. Life in the city was exhausting, and I needed a break to avoid burnout. I took a risk and told my boss I would be absent for a few months. My friends thought I was crazy. Moving to a rustic cabin remote from civilization was unthinkable to them. "How will you live?" they joked. "Where's your cell phone signal? What about groceries?" The taunts never stopped. I was compelled to go. I wanted to fix the place up, modernize it enough to have reliable heat, a stable roof, and maybe a spotty internet connection. Then write, read, and reconnect with nature. I had no idea that simple decision would lead me to Byron, one of the most irritating people I've met. Local Byron lived in another cabin down the mountain road a few miles away. Despite his distance, he was my closest neighbor because few people live in this rugged, forested area. After visiting a local general store to introduce myself and buy supplies, I met Byron. A small wooden store sold necessities and some novelty items. Locals often chatted there, especially on weekends when tourists bought snacks before hiking. Byron, sitting in an old rocking chair near the store entrance, invited me over with an oddly intense stare. "You the new owner of that old cabin near the ridge?" he asked with uncomfortably narrowed eyes. I knew from others that Byron was outspoken and territorial. I had no idea how intense he could be. I politely claimed ownership of the cabin and said it had been in my family for generations, a legacy I wanted to preserve. Byron initially nodded with a hint of respect, as if he understood I wasn't just flipping the property, but his face became calculating. "How much would you sell it?" he asked without greeting. I was surprised by the direct question. "I'm not selling it," I said. His gaze cooled. "Everything's got a price," he muttered. Air tension was palpable. The older store owner by the counter looked sympathetic. I politely told Byron I needed groceries. As I approached the shelves, he whispered, "We'll see about that." At the time, I dismissed the encounter as a quirky local letting off steam. Byron was described by the store owner, Bert, when we were alone by the canned goods aisle. "He's had his eye on that property for a while," Bert whispered. "He tried to buy it from your grandpa years ago, but he refused. Byrons Not Evil." I nodded, taking his words as a friendly warning regarding his pushiness. However, I had 100 reasons not to sell the cabin in my head, but I didn't think Byron would keep pressing the issue or make it outrageous. As I settled into the cabin, I made repairs and improvements. It was a huge but rewarding task. I replaced rotting porch boards, fixed the fireplace so it drew smoke properly, and installed a basic solar panel system to charge my laptop. While not hammering, painting, or tinkering, I drank coffee on the porch and watched deer graze in the clearing below. I also made short trips into the woods to gather kindling or find fishing spots. Every day the cabin felt more like home. This peace was incredible. Under that calm surface, a storm was brewing. Byron's truck moved slowly down the dirt road past my property several times while I worked outside. Instead of stopping to say hi, he would slow down, roll down his window, stare at me, and drive away. The feeling of being watched and evaluated was unsettling. I thought I was imagining things, but I knew Byron wanted this land. I should be kind, my neighborly instincts told me. I considered inviting him over for coffee or sharing my grandmother's jam recipes, which I was experimenting with. I hesitated to reach out because of that store conversation, which felt like a negotiation threat. The day Byron tried to sell again. It happened one mild autumn morning when the leaves were just turning gold and red. I read my grandfather's frayed wildlife journal on the front porch. A loud truck engine roared up the gravel path. I put the journal away, stood up and waited, heart racing, as Byron parked in front of the cabin. He exited in boots and a plaid jacket, casual but intimidating. He entered my porch without invitation. "I've been thinking," he said. "We should talk about this property. There might be a deal that works for us both." I stepped back, trying to stay calm. "Byron," I said, trying to be friendly, "I appreciate your interest. However, my family has owned this cabin for decades. It's not for sale." He shrugged, inspecting my repairs and improvements. "I'll pay double the market value," he said. "I'll go higher if you want. I need this land for a project I'm planning, and your spot's perfect." When I asked what kind of project he had in mind, he ignored me. "That's my business," he snapped. I tried to wait. "I'm not interested," I repeated. "No matter how much. I'm staying, or at least keeping this as a family retreat." Byron frowned in frustration. "You'll regret that," he grumbled. "And don't say I didn't warn you." He left the porch. He didn't even drive away. Standing by his truck, he glared at me. I nodded curtly and locked my door. My heart raced. I wanted to keep my property, but Byron was intimidating. Make tea and do chores to calm myself, telling myself I'd done nothing wrong. I could accept or reject Byron's offer to buy the land. That should have been enough. But Byron had other ideas. Within a week, I found strange footprints around the cabin, especially near my tool shed. They looked like boot prints, but nobody should be walking around my property at night. I was scared enough to buy a security camera, but the internet in this remote area was poor. I chose motion sensor spotlights for my cabin corners. Since this area was safe, I locked all doors and windows, a habit I'd never worried about before. Still, I hoped it was a random hiker or local kids exploring. However, I suspected it was Byron, possibly trying to contact me again or scare me into selling. I worried about someone peering through my windows when I went to bed. I considered contacting the local sheriff's department, but I wasn't sure they could remove footprints. I had a strong suspicion, but no video or direct evidence that it was Byron. Byron made his move before I could. On a Saturday morning, it was around 7 a.m. when my door was pounded loudly. While still in my pajamas, I opened it to find Byron looking furious. "I came by last night to talk to you," he said, "and I heard shots fired around here." I was stunned. Shots fired? Was asleep. Byron's face twitched in anger or frustration. "Don't deceive me. Shooting trespassers is wrong. This nation is free. I was afraid someone would call the sheriff because he was shouting." I repeated, "I didn't shoot. I was asleep." Byron waved his cell phone, refusing to accept my denial. "Call 911 if you don't leave that cabin. Shooting at people is a community threat." My usual approach was to talk things out. I froze when Byron became unreasonable and escalated quickly. I protested, "You can't call 911 and say I'm shooting people when I did no such thing." "Calling," Byron persisted. I heard him say, "Yes, I need the sheriff here. There's a situation with a dangerous individual who's firing guns off his porch," he said quietly. "He's refusing to sell me the property he's on, and he's threatening me with a weapon." My jaw dropped. This went beyond misunderstanding. Byron flatly lied to portray me as a crazy gun owner. My heart raced. If the sheriff believed him, I could be jailed or investigated for a long time. I told Byron to wait, went inside, and grabbed my phone, the only thing I could think of. I called the sheriff's department as the property's occupant, said Byron was at my front door making false claims about me firing a weapon, and was concerned for my safety. The dispatcher was calm and told me to stay inside and wait for the deputies. Byron paces on my porch. After 20 minutes, 2 sheriff's cars arrived. 4 deputies emerged with serious expressions, as if they had found a hostage. After discovering that Byron's claims were untrue, there was no gunfire, shell casings, bullet holes, or neighbors reporting gunshots, the deputies requested a private meeting. I told them about Byron's threats, repeated attempts to force me to sell, and my suspicions of trespassing. One deputy took notes while another quietly questioned Byron. Eventually, they reunited. "We've got conflicting stories," a deputy said. "He claims you threatened him with a gun, but we have no proof. Will you let us search your cabin for weapons?" Since I had nothing to hide, I agreed to the search. Looked around carefully. No guns, ammunitionless, no proof of Byron's claim. I let them check my phone, which had no calls when Byron said shots were fired. The camera roll on my phone showed no firearms either. After finding Byron's claims unfounded, deputies took him aside. They told him filing a false report was a serious crime, which I heard from afar. Byron claimed to have heard shots, but he had no proof. The deputies, furious, warned him that lying to police could result in charges of harassment or false police report. Byron switched tactics, accusing me of hoarding land he needed. The deputies were unimpressed. Before leaving, one deputy told me, "If you have any more trouble, call us immediately." I was relieved to learn the truth, but shaken. Was Byron willing to go far? So I worked on the cabin that night to distract myself. I started painting a neglected bedroom. I thought about my grandfather's life lessons while painting. He always believed in doing the right thing in a fair and honest way. After the day with Byron, I worried a restraining order might not work. His project was unknown, but he was determined. He might escalate until I gave in if he wanted to build on my land. I followed the deputy's advice and investigated my legal options. Next day, I drove to the nearest small town with a legal office. After 3 hours in the lobby flipping through old magazines, Rena, an attorney, arrived. She was direct and blunt. She pouted and asked some clarifying questions after I finished the story. She added, "You have grounds to file a harassment claim. If he returns to your land without permission, we can file trespassing charges." She also suggested installing a basic camera system. "Think about a trail camera," she advised. "Hunters use them. The motion-activated ones can be strapped to trees." Great idea. They record short clips that can be saved to an SD card without a stable internet connection. I thanked her, paid the consultation fee, and planned to gather more evidence if Byron persisted. Strangely quiet for a while. Autumn was in full swing and the mountain forests were vivid red, orange, and yellow. I would wake up, make coffee, and step out onto the porch to breathe cool air every morning. In retrospect, the serenity was too good to be true. I discovered solar panel tampering one evening. The wiring for one panel was cut, and the panel was partially unbolted as if someone started to remove it but got scared or changed their mind. Furious, I checked the motion sensor lights for overnight triggers. One bulb was broken. That made me run for a trail camera. After driving an hour, I bought several at another hardware store. I spent all afternoon placing them near the solar panels, shed, cabin path, and porch. Hard proof was needed if Byron was responsible. It wasn't long before cameras caught suspicious activity. Around 2 a.m. one crisp evening, they filmed Byron sneaking around my porch, shining a flashlight through a window to see if I was home. He attempted to open my tool shed in one clip. Ironically, a loud scraping sound must have startled him as he ran away nervously. Watching the footage the next morning made me queasy. I immediately called the sheriff's department and shared the videos. My statement was taken and I was asked to email the clips. No meaningless, conflicting stories this time. The evidence was clear. Byron was trespassing at night. I filed trespassing and theft charges. Deputies arrested him at his house with a warrant. They found my shed lock in his truck, which I had replaced a week earlier. He broke it during his break-in attempt. When confronted, Byron said he was just checking on me because he was worried I was in danger. Deputies didn't believe it. After a day in custody, his arraignment was scheduled for the following week. The situation might have ended there, but Byron wouldn't back down after being arrested. Rena helped me file a restraining order while Byron was on bail. A detailed statement, camera footage, and references to the false 911 call made it difficult. The judge gave me a temporary protective order requiring Byron to stay 100 yards from my property. He would be arrested immediately if he broke it. Though cautious, I enjoyed the cabin again after a small relief. I even adopted a rescue dog for security and companionship. Jupiter, a large mixed breed, adjusted to cabin life quickly and seemed to sense my anxiety, following me everywhere. Meanwhile, local talk spread. People who were polite but reserved approached me. The couple a mile down the road offered to fix my solar panel wiring. A neighbor with a small orchard gave me a stack of apples as a welcome. Although people rarely mentioned Byron, I sensed they knew about his attempts to bully me off my land. Byron was considered too pushy for his own good. Cecil, an elderly man, said Byron had once pressured him to sell farmland. "Took me months to get him off my back," Cecil said. "I threatened to build an electric fence if he trespassed again. That worked finally." Byron caused trouble despite the restraining order and charges. He spread rumors at the general store that I was a dangerous city person, planning to block the public hiking trail near my land and polluting the stream with chemicals. Nothing was true, and the locals were too smart to believe it. However, a few impressionable tourists passing by gave me strange looks like they expected me to threaten them if they passed by my property. I tried to ignore it. I dismissed the rest as petty gossip while the authorities handled the legal side. Eventually, that petty gossip escalated. A panicked woman in a small SUV drove up to my cabin and claimed I was diverting the stream, causing wildlife water shortages. I politely told her that was nonsense, showed her around, and walked her to the stream. After realizing she'd been lied to, she apologized. She said Byron cornered her in the store parking lot and yelled about, "The occupant of that old cabin is harming the environment." This nature lover decided to investigate. She thanked me and promised to tell others the truth after seeing the truth. I realized then how far Byron would go to smear my name for refusing to sell my land. A week later, Byron's attorney, or someone claiming to be his attorney, sent me a letter threatening to sue me for environmental damage, excessive noise, and property encroachment. I laughed. I showed Rena the letter, who read it with growing amusement. "This is not going anywhere," she said. "There's no proof of anything he's claiming, especially since he was arrested for trespassing on your property. We'll draft a response to highlight those facts." She typed a detailed reply, stating that we'd countersue for harassment and malicious prosecution if Byron continued this frivolous lawsuit. His attorney never responded. The attorney may have realized Byron's claims were untrue. Legal proceedings began. I testified at Byron's preliminary trespassing hearing. I recounted the camera footage, broken shed lock, and false 911 call. Byron claimed I framed him, but the judge was unconvinced. The security footage and his footprints in my yard made his story absurd. After setting a trial date, Byron's attorney negotiated a plea deal in which Byron would plead guilty to misdemeanor trespassing for probation, a fine, and 2 years off my property. Prison time awaited him if he broke that. I was relieved that justice was served, but I knew Byron wouldn't let a court order stop him from meddling. One evening, while sitting on the porch with Jupiter at my feet, I heard a car coming up the road and stopping near the property line. I quietly walked down the driveway with Jupiter leashed, only to find Byron's truck idling. He probably didn't enter my land because he knew it would violate his probation and restraining order. He glared on the roadside. There was no conflict, but it felt sinister. I took photos of his truck's license plate on my phone and showed him. His engine revved and he peeled out, scattering gravel. I planned to record the incident in case. Months passed. Snow covered the forest in winter. Due to icy mountain roads, I spent more time indoors splitting logs for the fireplace and making hearty soups. It was peaceful for a while despite the cold. I wondered if Byron was done. Perhaps probation, fines, and a possible jail sentence had hit home. These quiet months allowed me to finish the cabin renovations, improved insulation, refinished floors, and built a small workshop behind the cabin to store tools and possibly carve wood. It felt like the peaceful retreat I'd always wanted, not under siege. Jupiter was happy too, playing in the snow like a half-sized pup. Spring thawed the snowbanks and greened the mountain. The new season had an unexpected twist. Surveyors in neon vests and tripods arrived at my cabin one afternoon. They claimed to represent a real estate developer with an easement through my land. My stomach sank. The only developer I could think of who might be interested in a remote area like this would be someone working with Byron. Perhaps this was his mysterious project. I told the surveyors I had no knowledge of an easement, and they politely showed me doubtful documents. Mislabeled property lines and legal descriptions contradicted my deed. I contacted Rena again, alarmed. She shook her head after scanning the documents. "This is absurd. They're forging or misrepresenting an expired claim. They can't enter your land without an easement." Even though Rena reassured them, the surveyors marked some trees and marked a line through my woods. Concerned, I asked them to leave until the legal matter was resolved. They apologized, saying they were following developer orders. They left quietly but left some flags. I fumed and put those flags in a box to use as evidence. Over the next few days, I called the county recorder's office and requested all land-related documents. No easement existed that matched the surveyor's claim. Rena sent the developer letters warning of legal consequences if they trespassed again. I discovered the developer was a small corporation with Byron as a principal. That clarified everything. He planned a large project involving my parcel. When the developer corporation received our letters, they said they were well within their rights. and that the matter would be decided in court if we continued to obstruct their lawful activities. I laughed grimly. Can their activities be lawful after Byron tried false 911 calls, trespassing, and intimidation? We anticipated a legal battle, but it never occurred. Rena connected me with a real estate law expert friend. This expert debunked the company's claims. We outlined every legal flaw in their easement in a strong letter. We threatened a countersuit if they didn't stop trespassing or pressuring me to sell. They retreated after realizing they were powerless. No more surveyors, fake legal documents, or Byron visits, thankfully. Byron kept stirring. He spray-painted a threatening message on a rock by my cabin's main road, even though he couldn't legally enter. "You're not welcome here. Sell now." I saw it on my way home from the store one afternoon. I told the sheriff, but heavy rains had washed away most of the paint, making it hard to prove Byron was responsible. The deputy who took my statement sighed, likely as tired of Byron as I was. He said they'd increase patrols for a while, even though they needed proof. The local community became more aware throughout. Small-time acquaintances began supporting me. My greenhouse fresh vegetables came from a local farmer. One of the orchard owners helped me install a new gate at my driveway to deter trespassers. I even received a small homemade pie on my doorstep with a note saying, "We appreciate you, neighbor." My sense of belonging replaced my isolation. All the mountaineers seemed to be telling Byron, "Enough is enough." Byron's final meltdown sealed his fate. Summer had arrived and the forest was alive. I walked Jupiter on a warm evening within my property. My trail cameras lined the property, mostly unused but still working. Smoke appeared too close for comfort as I walked down a narrow path. I panicked and ran closer to find it coming from the property line. A small campfire or controlled burn, not a wildfire. The fire was in an inappropriate place. Alarmed that the flames could spread, I ran forward and found Byron hunched over a brush pile he was burning near the border. "He must put it out," I shouted. He turned around, startled, and we stared at each other in the smoky air. "You're doing what?" I demanded, echoing in the quiet forest. Byron glared at me, sweating. "Clearing land," he snaps. "You're not clearing land on my property," I raged. "Get out of here or I'll call the police." My adrenaline rose. He was reckless to start a fire so close to a heavily wooded area in summer. Jupiter barked and tugged at the leash. Byron approached me, ignoring the small fire behind him. The angry man twisted his face. "If you just sold when I asked, I wouldn't have to do this," he scowled. "You're messing with my future." Enough. Phone in hand, I dialed. He lunged at me to steal the phone, but Jupiter leapt between us, snarling with a rare protective instinct. Byron tripped on loose gravel and fell to his side. I called 911, breathlessly explaining that Byron was illegally burning brush on my property and trying to assault me. The operator's tone changed when I mentioned Byron's probation and restraining order. "Stay where you are if you can do so safely," the operator told me. "We're sending a fire truck and deputies." Byron scrambled to his feet, only to find Jupiter barking furiously. Flames were dangerously close to the tree line. "Don't be stubborn, just sell me the place," Byron shouted in desperation. Sirens blared in the forest within minutes. After a fire truck extinguished the flames, a patrol car arrived. 2 deputies immediately restrained Byron. This time, no argumentation. Byron invaded my land, violating his restraining order. Arson or reckless burning was his crime. He tried to assault me. He was handcuffed and taken. I answered police questions and showed them where he set the fire. It also recorded his lunge at me on my phone. After the vehicles left, I was left with a blackened brush pile, scorched earth, and a huge wave of relief. Legal proceedings dominated the weeks that followed. Byron was denied bail for probation violation. The county charged him with multiple offenses, including reckless endangerment, because starting a fire in a wooded area without a permit could have caused a major disaster. Old trespassing charges were still on my record, but these new ones were more prominent. When called to testify again, it was straightforward. Byron received jail time and a longer probation. The judge warned of harsher penalties for future harassment, citing Byron's history. Byron was punished for his constant intimidation. I kept my family's mountain cabin, except for a bit of burned brush that was quickly replanted. Dealing with Byron was one of the most stressful experiences of my life, but I came out stronger and more convinced that persistence and truth usually win out, even when the road is full of obstacles. The developer corporation Byron tried to form dissolved soon after Byron was sentenced. Nobody wanted to be associated with his recklessness and legal issues. The cabin is quiet again. Forests are peaceful and tall. I hike, fish, and host cookouts with Jupiter and friendly neighbors. I want to keep this place forever and pass it on to my children. If anyone harasses me like Byron did, I'm better prepared. Every squeak of the old porch boards reminds me of my grandfather's words to preserve this family history. After everything, I feel those memories and this land are safer than ever. I know I chose well by not selling. Byron's story shows that no amount of intimidation can make someone give up their rights. Waking up to the pine tree wind and bird song has restored my peace. The past year has been stressful, but it shows how strong one can be when defending something valuable. I appreciate the neighbors who supported me, the deputies who did their jobs, and the legal system that exposed Byron's lies. This journey was unexpectedly intense, but I wouldn't change it. This cabin was always worth fighting for, and my grandfather would be proud that I never gave up. I can almost see him nodding quietly by the fireplace. Friends, thank you. See you soon.